This lecture is going to be all about mitosis, which should be familiar to you all. You should have learned this already in your intro biology class. So for a lot of you, hopefully this will be a very fond memory and will just be refreshing your brains to remember exactly what goes on here. So let's get started. Mitosis is happening in the body cells, okay? It's the way that the body cells make a new body cell, okay? This is not your reproductive cells. So not sperm cells, not egg cells. That's a different process. We'll talk about that later on in the year. But this is just taking a body cell, making an actual copy of it, both the nucleus and all the organelles. And at the end, you have two identical cells, okay, with the same amount of chromosomes and same amount of everything in each cell, okay? Because we're dealing with DNA and DNA dividing and dividing evenly, I want to get into a little bit of DNA vocab so that we can all kind of speak the language here. So I'm sure you've heard of chromosomes, and as humans, we have 23 pairs of chromosomes. And so basically, here's the thing, you guys, is what we have is our DNA double helix, which I know you all are familiar with, okay? Well, what happens is this DNA double helix, it's super, super long. It'd be like miles long if you were to stretch it out, okay? And so what happens is in order for it to not take up that much space, and in order for it to not get tangled, what happens is this DNA ends up kind of coiling around these little proteins, these little protein balls called histones, okay? And then those histones like wrap themselves into a coil, and then that whole coil kind of like takes on this general shape that we all think of as a chromosome. Okay, so a chromosome is basically DNA that's been wrapped and coiled around these little histones, okay? So this is kind of what we call a chromosome, but knowing that like you have to zoom way far in to actually get to the double helix that we think of for DNA, okay? When your DNA is not always in these chromosome shapes, that's what we think of. Oh yeah, you got chromosomes, sure. But a lot of the time, your DNA is completely unraveled like a bowl of spaghetti, okay? And when it's in that form, it's called chromatin. And then only when it kind of tightly winds and gets into this more like condensed, organized structure, that's when it's called a chromosome. Okay, here's just another picture showing what we saw in the last slide. Here's that double helix. Here's that double helix winding around histones. The histones form little clusters, and they wind and they wind and they wind, and then that whole thing kind of becomes this big jumble, which we refer to as a chromosome. Okay, when it's unwound, it's chromatin. Okay, so here is a chromosome, and then it's going to need to copy itself in order to be able to end up with a cell with all the DNA. And so here's what it looks like when it's copied, okay? This one part is called a sister chromatid. This other part is just called a sister chromatid, okay? They're like identical sisters, okay? And they are joined here at the middle with what we call a centromere, okay? And so here's a chromatid, here's a chromatid. This is a chromosome, the whole thing. This is also a chromosome. What? Here's an unduplicated chromosome, and here's a duplicated chromosome. Okay, so both are chromosomes. One is just a single copy, and one is, hey, a double copy because I'm getting ready to divide and go through mitosis. So now that we've got our chromosome vocab, let's go back to mitosis and see what happens. Mitosis occurs in 4 phases: prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase, or PMAT. Okay, at the very end, there is cytokinesis, technically not part of mitosis, it's separate, and that's when the cell actually physically divides. So mitosis actually is essentially these things get ready for the division, but cytokinesis is the actual division. Before your cell is doing mitosis, it's in what's called interphase. In interphase, your cell is just like living its life. It's doing its thing. It's growing. It might be repairing some things. And then your cell is going to prepare to divide. And in order to do that, it's going to replicate all of its organelles because it's going to need all those mitochondria and ribosomes and things in the new cell. And it's also going to copy its DNA. Okay, so all of this happens in this interphase before we get to actual mitosis. So mitosis is PMAT, prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase. So let's get into it. Your cell is going to get a signal to divide, and we'll talk more about cell signalings later. And once it gets that signal, it's going to leave interphase stage. It's going to go into prophase. So here in prophase, before in interphase, our chromosomes were in chromatin. They were just a jumble of spaghetti in the nucleus. And now, they're going to start winding and forming this chromosome structure that we're kind of used to seeing. Notice here a nuclear membrane, okay, that surrounds and keeps the DNA in one zone. That's going to go away. There's going to be these things called centrioles, okay? And you're going to see them, and they're going to start moving to two opposite ends of the cell. And these centrioles have these little like fibers, almost like spider webby things or strings called spindle fibers that's going to attach to them. And this takes the cell quite a while to do. It's the longest phase of mitosis. Then in metaphase, our chromosomes are lined up right in the middle. Notice our centrioles are on opposite sides, and our spindle fibers are going to connect to the middle of the duplicated chromosomes here. So they're going to attach here to the middle. And this is what it looks like in an actual cell. This is where different parts of it are dyed with different colors. Okay, so here are spindle fibers in green. Here are the chromosomes in blue. Okay. Next up is anaphase. So this is where they pull apart. One sister chromatid goes to the left, one sister chromatid goes to the right, thanks to those centrioles and spindle fibers pulling them apart. The cell kind of gets longer, and we see that separation. The chromosomes are no longer in the middle. This is the fastest phase of mitosis. Then our final phase of actual mitosis is telophase. This is when we start to see the cell membrane start to pinch in just a little bit. We start to see that nuclear envelope begin to form again. Okay. And then once that happens, then our chromosomes can unwind again into their chromatin form. They're like bowl of spaghetti form. Okay, so they'll unwind and just be a whole mess of DNA everywhere. And the spindle fibers will go away. Again, here's what it looks like in like a dyed cell. And then lastly, cytokinesis. Again, this is not technically part of mitosis, but in order to finalize our process, we have to end with two identical cells. And so here's where the cytoplasm and organelles are now actually two separate things. We get two identical daughter cells that are different from, two identical daughter cells that are the exact same as the one before. This process is ever so slightly different in plants and animals. In animals, it's easy, just the membrane pinches in. In plants, not only does the membrane pinch in, but you got to get a cell plate that forms here, which will form a new cell wall that has to be there as well. So here's just a summary of the highlights of why things do mitosis, the different phases, and the main things happening in these phases. If you want to, you can pause the video, read through these things. It's just kind of a good summary of what we just talked about. And here are some things for you to check. Hey, did I understand the lecture? Do I understand mitosis? Here are the main things that you should be able to know and understand now from watching this lecture. And lastly, as always, we're in the textbook, chapter 9, section 2. And yeah, so go there if you need any more help or visuals.